In my previous video, I talked about arcs like 𝕣𝕕, 𝕣𝕕𝕒𝕕, Dressrosa, Wano, and Egghead, and how they make it impossible to pretend that One Piece is not political. That video focused on genocide, erased history, state violence, and how power justifies itself while calling it order. This video is going to continue that same thread, that same tone through the same lens, because those themes are not isolated to a few moments in the story. They exist from the very beginning. If anything, the early arcs make the political messaging even clearer, because they mirror patterns that have repeated across history for thousands of years. So let's go back and actually say what each of these arcs are doing. Before we ever reach kingdoms or global powers, One Piece starts by telling you something very simple about authority. In Romance Dawn, the first real antagonist isn't a pirate at all. It's Captain Morgan, a man with rank, a uniform, and legal authority. He is openly abusive, corrupt, and cruel, and the people under his control are not protected by him. They're terrorized by him. The Marines around him enforce obedience, not justice. Rank matters more than morality. Power matters more than truth. Luffy doesn't debate this system or try to reform it. He rejects it outright. He helps the people that Morgan hurts because it's right, not because it's legal. From the very beginning, the story tells you authority and justice are not the same thing, and that freedom does not come from permission. From there, we reach Drum Island. Drum Island is about healthcare as power, and about how denying care is a form of violence. Wapol doesn't just rule incompetently. He hoards doctors, he drives them out, he criminalizes healing unless it benefits him. People are not dying because the cures don't exist. They are dying because access to the cures are restricted. That's not fantasy. Throughout history, control over medicine has been used to decide who lives and who dies. Colonized populations denied treatment while disease spread. Enslaved people worked until collapsed and replaced rather than healed. Famines where elites received care while peasants starved. Even in modern history, healthcare has been weaponized through sanctions, insurance systems, and policy decisions that leave marginalized communities to die first, while resources are hoarded elsewhere. Drum Island makes a very clear statement. Violence does not always arrive with guns or bombs. Sometimes it arrives through policy, scarcity, and a ruler deciding that survival is conditional. And when people learn that the system will not protect them, they are often forced into survival under someone else's control. That brings us to Arlong Park. Arlong Park is about racialized oppression, economic exploitation, and state collaboration with abuse. Arlong does not rule in secret. He extorts an entire village openly. He traps a child in debt, and he enforces submission through fear and violence. And the Marines know exactly what is happening. They're paid to look away. Nami is not only trapped by Arlong's strength, she is trapped by a system that has decided that her suffering is acceptable. Corruption makes justice optional and enforcement selective. This mirrors real-world systems where law enforcement ignores abuse in marginalized communities, where victims are forced into survival roles that later get weaponized against them, and where violence is tolerated as long as order is maintained. Arlong Park teaches an early lesson. Oppression does not require everyone's participation. It only requires institutional indifference. From there, the story expands outward. From local abuse to large-scale domination, Skypiea is about colonialism, religious supremacy, and divine justification. Enel, or Anaru, arrives on a land that is not his, declares himself God, and rewrites history, erases the culture that comes before him, and reframes resistance as heresy. The Shandians are not enemies because they attacked him. They are enemies because they exist on land that power wants to control. This is one of the most consistent patterns in all of human history. Empires claiming divine right, colonizers declaring themselves chosen, indigenous people framed as obstacles to destiny. From ancient conquests justified by religion, to the Crusades, to European colonization of the Americas, Africa, and the Middle East, power has repeatedly framed itself as righteous while casting those it displaces as illegitimate. Skypiea shows how belief systems are weaponized to make theft and violence feel holy. Then comes 𝕣𝕕𝕒 Archipelago. This is where One Piece stops letting the audience look away. Slavery is no longer implied, it is explicit, legal, public, auctioned. Human beings are sold in broad daylight. Violence against them is casual. The people committing it are nobles protected by the state. The law exists to shield them, not the enslaved. This is not ancient history. Across all of recorded time, slavery has never disappeared. It changes form, Chattel slavery, serfdom, forced labor camps, indentured servitude, human trafficking, debt bondage, prison labor systems. In the Congo, forced labor under colonial rule killed millions. In the United States, slavery evolved into convict leasing and mass incarceration. Across the world today, migrant workers are trapped in exploitative labor systems, and children mine resources that power global industries. The most important part of 𝕣𝕕𝕒 is not the cruelty itself. It's how normalized it is. Most people look away. They accept it as the cost of the world working. That is the point. And when people are deemed disposable, the next step is removal. Amazon Lily shows what happens after systemic sexual violence. The Kuja isolate themselves not because they hate the world, but because the world enslaved them. Their culture is built around strength, defense, and distance because vulnerability once meant chains. This mirrors real-world communities across history that withdrew after enslavement, colonialization, or gendered violence. Cultures harden, not out of cruelty, but out of memory. Safety becomes synonymous with separation. Amazon Lily shows how trauma reshapes entire societies, not just individuals. From there, the story descends into 𝕣𝕒𝕒 Down. 𝕣𝕒𝕒 Down is about mass incarceration, punishment, replacing justice. This prison is not designed to rehabilitate, it is designed to break. Prisoners are stacked by perceived threat. Torture is routine, identity is erased, people are buried alive behind walls and forgotten. Some inmates committed crimes. Many are simply just inconvenient. Political enemies, dissidents, people the state does not want to confront publicly. Throughout history, prisons have been used to disappear people under the language of order. Labor camps, political prisons, detention centers, systems where legality replaces morality. 𝕣𝕒𝕒 Down asks a brutal question. If cruelty is legal, does justice still exist? Then comes Marineford. Marineford is about war as spectacle and mass death as policy. The world government stages a public execution and frames it as justice. They control the narrative. They decide who deserves to die. Civilian deaths are treated as acceptable losses in service of authority. Ace is executed not for something he personally did, but for who he represents. His lineage, his symbolism, his existence threatens legitimacy. Throughout history, people have been killed for identity rather than action. Bloodlines erased, families punished, entire populations labeled dangerous by association. Public execution, purges, pogroms, genocide, wars framed as necessary for stability while civilians absorb the cost. Marineford shows how states turn violence into theater and call it peace, and the world watches. After the war, after the world resets, we reach Punk Hazard. Punk Hazard is about state-sanctioned human experimentation and the disposability of children. Children are kidnapped, separated from their families, lied to, drugged, experimented on, told it's for their own good, told they're being helped, told the suffering is necessary. They are not seen as people, they are seen as data. Caesar Clown does not view the children as victims, he views them as resources. And the system around him allows it to happen. It funds it, protects it, benefits from the results. That is not fictional horror. Throughout history, children have been used as test subjects by states and institutions that have decided that some lives mattered less. Medical experimentation on enslaved people and indigenous populations, eugenics programs, forced sterilizations, radiation testing, unethical drug trials, and in modern times, children being detained by ICE, separated from their parents, denied basic care, traumatized as a deterrent, officials claiming that it's just policy or safety, just like Punk Hazard. The cruelty is bureaucratic, sanitized, framed as necessary. The suffering is the point. Punk Hazard exposes something critical. The worst violence often wears the mask of science, law, or security. And children are always the easiest victims because they cannot fight back. Then the story moves to Whole Cake Island. Whole Cake is about authoritarian control disguised as care. Big Mom offers protection, food, and stability, but everything has a price. Obedience, silence, lifespan, the ability to leave. People are told that they are safe, but only as long as they comply. This mirrors authoritarian systems across history where survival is conditional, feudal systems, totalitarian states, cultures where loyalty to power outweighs human life. Whole Cake exposes the lie at the center of these systems. That safety without freedom is not safety at all. And when systems like this are challenged, power does not respond with accountability. It responds with performance. That brings us to the Reverie. At the Reverie, world leaders gather to debate justice, stability, and order, while slavery continues just outside the room. The suffering is known, the abuse is documented, and yet everything is discussed carefully, diplomatically, without any urgency at all. Condemnations are vague, reforms are promised later, responsibility is endlessly deferred. This mirrors global summits throughout history where atrocities are acknowledged without consequence, where statements replace action, where morality becomes something to be discussed rather than practiced. The Reverie shows how power survives not just through force, but through respectability, through appearing reasonable while benefiting from exploitation. And when you step back and you look at all of this together, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Authority without justice. Healthcare is control. Local oppression protected by corruption. Colonialism justified as destiny. Slavery normalized, trauma shaping entire cultures, incarceration as erasure, war as justice, children treated as expendable, authoritarianism disguised as protection, global hypocrisy as policy. These are not separate stories. They are the stages of power repeating all across human history. That is why One Piece is political. Not because fans made it that way, not because modern events forced interpretation, but because the story itself is about power, oppression, resistance, and freedom that mirrors the real world too closely to ignore. So when someone says One Piece isn't political, what they're really saying is they just don't want to connect fiction to reality. They have no media literacy. But the story has never let you stay comfortable. It has been telling you exactly what it is from the beginning. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And like I said, that's not radical. It's just basic media literacy.